Uh, yeah. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us this afternoon. It's always nice to see people coming together from our community to learn and to share. So, thank you for joining us this afternoon. Um, Last year, sometime in September, we had done a gathering, an in person gathering around gender. And one of the questions that we had asked people in the sidelines was, what is one of those social sector jargons or words that we think that we are overusing? And intersectionality was one of them. And I don't think it came from the sentiment of what it meant, but much more from the complexity of the word and what it means, really. One from the lived, the unpacking of it when it comes to the lived experiences of people, their own backgrounds, race, gender, and other such factors, but also from a little bit more zoomed out level when we're looking at different sectors and what does that mean now, more specifically in the background of several blurring lines, thanks to the polycrisis that the sectors that our world is going through right now, right? So when Neeraj and his team, yeah. So when Neeraj and his team reached out to us to run this session on intersectionality in development, it made absolute sense for us to also learn and unpack. So we're very glad to host this session, and we're thankful to his team for being part of it. Before I hand it over to him, I would like to do a brief introduction to Belongg. Belongg is a social impact enterprise focused on research and innovation. They work on intersectional inclusion across development topics, from agriculture to nutrition to mental health, law, and justice. Their work includes primary and secondary research projects, as well as curation of experts on intersectionality through a Belongg Circle, which they might explain sometime during the next 90 minutes, and the creation and dissemination of knowledge in the form of article, podcasts, and conferences. We're glad to have, I think, his entire team here today. Neeraj will lead it and then kind of introduce the rest of them. Neeraj is the founder of Belongg and has deep expertise in social innovation, enterprise, and strategy. And many of you might have interacted with him in his many different avatars and different hats that he wears. So hoping for a very interactive and engaged session. Over to you, Neeraj. Thanks again for joining us.
Thanks, Sana, and really wonderful to be here. And thank you everyone for joining. Hopefully we'll have a very exciting session over the next 90 minutes, and truly appreciate the space that Sahana and Gautam and others have made for this, and hoping that this will be a session that will be mutually kind of beneficial for everyone. We are hoping to learn as much from you as share some ideas we've been toying around with. So it's really designed to be fairly interactive. I will now turn it to Vaibhav and Amya, who will sort of get us started, and then we'll have a little bit of an introduction to this and a few slides, and then we'll sort of break out into groups and then come back again. So over to you, Vaibhav.
Thanks, Neera. And thank you, Sahana, for, I think, giving the entire introduction to Belongg. So we can just jump right into the discussion right now. And I think what we wanted to do to start with is that we wanted to do a small exercise and a small activity with all of you. We know this is just past lunchtime, so it'll be good to sort of get our minds working and get your inputs on this. And what we just want to do is ask you a simple question, right? Or as complex as it can be. What does intersectionality mean to you? Right? And there are no rules to answer this. You can answer it within a word, within a few words. You want to write a sentence, you're free to do that. What we'd like you to do is to just go to menti.com. We'll also paste the same link within the chat. It's already there. And you have to enter the code, which is an 8-digit code. So all of you, whether you can use it on your phone or your computer, it doesn't matter. And you can enter multiple times, whatever you'd like to say. And as and when it happens, we'll display what's coming up in terms of what intersectionality means to all of you on the screen. We'll just take about a couple of minutes and a little more to do this. And we'd encourage you to be as much over-inclusive, and you can try to say as much as you want over here. We'd be very happy to receive all kinds of entries, right? There's nothing wrong or right over here. So, yeah, I think we'll just pause in a second. But I see that we still have more entries coming up, so maybe we can wait a little more time. Okay. So thank you everyone. I think to just entering everything that you think makes sense as intersectionality. And one of the reasons we wanted to ask you this right away is because when we're thinking about complex subjects or complex topics, uh, it's also sometimes maybe important to just unpack what's the first thing that comes to our mind, right? And here, if we see a few things that are coming across the board, right, it is that identity has been represented across the board, right? Whether it's the power dynamics related to identity, whether it is different kinds of identities, or the kind of boxes we get placed in because of identities, right? Yes, I see Americanism. We'd like to know what that is. So maybe if someone can put it in the chat. But I think in just thinking about this, and before we move on to unpacking the idea with Neerath as well, in terms of what intersectionality has meant in terms of our work and how it has come about, I think it's just important to remember that intersectionality, I think, one of the biggest words, right? So the size of the words actually represents the number of times that entry has come in. And I think complex, interconnectedness, and diversity, right? Those three words, I think, really capture uh, what this means, right? Because interconnectedness is not just in terms of the identities, but also in terms of the efforts that we are making, in terms of the partnerships that we are trying to build. And the complexity is in not just the terms of the concept, but also in how we are trying to deal with it, right? Even all the organizations that are represented here, we have more than 20 of them. Uh, how are we all trying to address the same issues, right? In terms of identity is different, but it also intersects. And on that note, I think I'll just pass it over to Neerath. And Neerath, over to you.
Thanks, Pepper. And thanks everyone for playing along with us. So I'll start out with maybe a few slides just to frame the discussion today, and then we'll have a little bit of examples we'll share of the work that we've been doing and how intersectionality has shown up for us, and then we'll sort of go into groups. A little bit of background to Belongg. So Belongg is a social venture I set up a couple of years ago. The other hat I also wear, some of you may know, I'm a partner at this consulting firm called Dahlberg, which focuses on international development. And we work with clients in India, outside of India, on many development topics and across categories of SDGs and so on. And the reason I felt the need to start Belongg is the realization that the development ecosystem has some implicit assumptions, and the way the problem gets framed, the development problem or the impact problem gets framed, while it does optimize for certain things, it also leaves out very important things. And that's what really led to the formation of Belongg a couple of years ago. And we'll cover that in a little bit of detail. So when you think about a domain like development or impact, it's important to almost ask the ontological question: what is the development ecosystem, right? And how do actors in the development ecosystem, what do they think the ecosystem is? What do they think the principal problems of the ecosystem are? And these are the ontological questions. And then how do we discover these problems? How do we determine whose voices sort of show up in framing the problem, in framing the solution, in prioritizing solutions? So that's the epistemological kind of question in development. Now, and these kind of questions stayed with us for a bit, which sort of brought us to this word intersectionality. Now, the way intersectionality was first used is most people know it was by Kimberly Crenshaw in the late 80s. It was used obviously in the US context, and it really was about how different aspects of a person's social identity and political identity, in terms of different things, gender, caste, religion, race, ethnicity, disability, all of those combine to either create advantages or disadvantages, right? Either privileges or discriminations. And that's the way it was first used. It doesn't translate fully well in any other context, but the context that she was talking about. But we felt it was a good enough word to use because it's a shorthand and it sort of communicates some very powerful ideas. And that's the word we've sort of stuck with, and I'll sort of walk you through why we think it's still a very relevant way of thinking about this. Next. The other thing I want to just lay out when we think about this is the notion of assets. Now, a lot of us working in development are grappling fundamentally with the poverty problem, right? Where we think about money as an asset, and if people have either wealth assets or income assets, then they actually get access to multiple benefits. They get access to good healthcare, education, nutrition, whatever. But there are other kinds of assets also, which an individual or an organization can control that will provide future benefits. And one very important category of assets is the identity. Next. So, so this then becomes very, very fundamental to the way Belongg's sort of been doing work, and many of our partners and the discussions we've been having over the last couple of years, the projects we're trying to conceive of. We're trying to put money and identity at the same level. We're saying that both of these are really important assets for people and for institutions, and scarcity in either of these assets leads to different kinds of problems. The poverty problem is very, very well known. The identity problem gets touched upon, but it's not unpacked as much. It does not get into the heart of program design or policy design as much as it should. Next. And it's helpful to actually look at the history of modern philanthropy, the modern kind of development ecosystem. If you just rewind about 100 years or so, and try and understand why the ecosystem right now is the way it is. So modern philanthropy, the origins really were with the big kind of American capitalists, the steel kind of industry that led to philanthropy getting formed a certain way. The way the problem was defined was a lot of people not having money, and then how can you sort of make money available to them? It also became a cross-cutting problem because of the disruptions of World War I and World War II, which were very cross-cutting disruptions. They affected almost all kinds of people equally. And hence the thing that would solve that challenge, again, was the money kind of solution. So a lot of institutions got formed. If you look at the charters of all of these Bretton Woods institutions, if you look at the updated charters in the 1950s of many, many foundations, what gets a lot of attention is the money problem, money as an asset, and other aspects sort of don't get mentioned at all, in fact. And fast forward a few decades to the late 90s, and what ends up happening is you've got philanthropy sort of focusing on the money question, public policy also sort of focusing on the money question, but also then the private sector kind of joins the party. So you have people like C.K. Prahlad, others who sort of say that, look, there is actually economic value at the bottom of the economic pyramid. There are people who have needs, they need all kinds of basic services, and you can actually build sustainable business models, providing very valuable things to those people. And then that drives a bunch of innovation, let's say packaging innovation. Many of us who've gone to business school, we studied how people like Unilever, etc., they sort of squished their the packaging size. You had the 2 rupee shampoo and the 1 rupee soap as a direct consequence of some of this. But again, what's important to remember is that both in the philanthropy layer and also in the private sector layer, the frame that was getting used is really the money frame. People who have money are on top of the pyramid. People who don't have money are at the bottom of the pyramid, and that framing has really, it's everywhere. It's that framing is like a meta object, and it sort of shapes everything in the development ecosystem, even now. Next. And some sort of proxies for this is, let's say, what if you just do a Google search for how many occurrences are there on different World Bank websites for different terms, right? So poverty gets, let's say, more than 2 million mentions. This is sometime late last year. This search is On the other hand, things like the queer community, caste, and disability, they get 1% of that. Disability gets maybe 10% of that. Gender gets 1/3 of that, right? So these are all like very crude proxies, but they help us understand what the ecosystem really considers to be important and places front and center. Next. So this is where the intersectionality kind of matrix, the way Belongg has been thinking of it, comes in. And I want to spend a couple of minutes on this slide. So if you look at different domains in life, one way of thinking about that would be different SDGs, right? So you've got 17 SDGs, they cover different aspects of a person's life. And we've just pulled out a few that are relevant for some of RNP grantees. So let's say you've got things like education, mental health, conservation. You might even have things like water, etc. So think of them as columns in a matrix. And then you think of different aspects of identity, things like gender or caste or religion or disability, those as rows. So you come up with a matrix. And in each of these cells, there are lots and lots of people who have some aspect of their life showing up in a cell. Obviously not, I mean, they're complex people, their life should not be seen through such a cell, but it's a useful device. In each of these cells, you have, for instance, if I were to look at education and disability, right? There's a bunch of people who experience the education system with a disability that they carry. Similarly, if you look at, let's say, the queer community and mental health, or if you look at conservation and, let's say, ethnicity. So there are literally hundreds of millions of people who experience that intersection, and they experience a range of challenges in that intersection. And that challenge can come because of two reasons. One is just prejudice and bias that they experience because of their identity in that space, or because they find that products and services or programs that are designed within that vertical do not adequately cater to their needs, right? To their unique needs because of their identity. So that's what people experience. But what's also important is that different cells have different levels of knowledge, right? So many cells actually, we don't even know the problems that exist. There are lots and lots of blind spots in many of these domains. In certain domains, the problems are known, but the research evidence is kind of not very rigorous. The research on the problem side hasn't been really done. Sometimes it gets done, but it's not socialized, so it's not factoring into the calculus of multiple decision makers. Sometimes problems are known, but solutions are not known, and sometimes solutions are not scaled. So across this entire matrix, you have different kinds of problems which need research interventions, which need convenings, which need solutioning. And that's really what Belongg is trying to sort of focus on. Next. I've already talked about the two pathways through which people might experience suboptimal outcomes by virtue of their identity. One is the prejudice and bias pathway. I mean, just to use an airline example, oftentimes we hear that airlines refuse entry to disabled people. The superficial reason given is that there's a safety issue, but that's a case of prejudice and bias. The other pathway through which a person with a disability might face challenges in the airline kind of travel process would be where the check-in process or the boarding process is not designed for there's no bias as such. The airline wants to let them in, but the whole process is poorly designed for them. So both of these pathways, either independently or together, can lead to very suboptimal outcomes for people with certain identities in different domains in life. Next. Sorry, if you can just go to, has the slide shifted for you? Oh. Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is like a conceptual way of thinking about this. What we've tried to do is to extend the idea of the pyramid to this identity question, right? So if you were to look at the original conception, the base of the pyramid, the poverty kind of problem, we've sort of added this notion called the side of the pyramid, right? Which is the identity problem. Now, obviously, this pyramid is just this is not the way the economic pyramid looks. It's more like this. But assume this is just a visual device. Assume you had like the base of the pyramid, which is where people don't have economic power. They have low levels of monetary assets. the side of the pyramid is where people have low levels of identity assets, right? And they get a lot of disadvantages because of their lack of identity assets. Now, if you put both of these things together, what immediately happens is you get 4 segments. Next. This whole side of the pyramid is quite large. Different estimates have been made about how large this side of the pyramid is. So the pink economy or the queer economy is super large, $5 trillion. The disability economy is more than $10 trillion. The Islamic economy, again, similar size. Assets owned by SC and ST populations in India are close to $1 trillion. So these are very, very large slices of society. These are not like very small, thin slices, which is why we've sort of, when we say side of the pyramid, it's actually half the pyramid, right? Uh, Next. And so coming back to the 4 segments that this kind of framing then yields. So segments 1 and 3 are what is called the market, right? So this is the part of the society where you actually have the willingness and the ability to pay for certain kinds of services. A lot of private sector companies run business models to deliver services here. But what they don't look at, and we've been speaking to a lot of private sector sort of organizations on how they think about segment 3, which is basically people who have the willingness to pay, but they don't actually have products and services that meet their need, segment 3. So there are multiple reasons why segment 3 kind of gets overlooked. And then coming to the two segments 2 and 4, which are classic kind of base of the pyramid, the segment 2 is the focus of most development activity, the so-called normal beneficiary. But segment 4 is really the side of the base of the pyramid, right? So where you actually have people with marginalized identities, poor kind of identity assets and poor monetary assets, right? So the worst of both worlds, if you will. And that segment needs special attention, special kind of programs to be designed for them, need finding processes to run quite differently for them. And both segments 3 and segment 4 are things that Belongg has been trying to sort of focus on through our research and program design work. Next. And the reason why these segments get overlooked, A, is just because of asymmetry of information. The level of data that's available about these segments is quite poor, especially if you look at certain kinds of identities. Number 2, even if it's there, it's sort of buried somewhere. It's not in discourse. There's kind of limited empathy. There's context kind of asymmetry. There's a lot of human and psychological biases that come in, right? So there's this whole thing about confirmation bias. What we know, we sort of stick to. There's we discount problems of people very, very unlike us. There's a lot of data issues, and there's a lot of psychology which kind of goes into why these segments don't get prioritized. And then there's this kind of other implicit assumption that we've heard multiple people share with us. They think that let us at least solve segment 2 before we solve segment 4, right? So there's some sequencing that donors and funders and investors seem to sometimes carry in their heads, that look, let me solve for the normal person first, and then we can solve for the marginalized person later, right? So all of these things come together to lead to suboptimal levels of innovation or focus on both segments 3 and 4. I think given that this is a session with grantees of RNP, I think the thing that's most interesting is the segment 4. How should you be thinking about people who have low levels of both monetary assets and also identity assets, and what that might look like in different verticals that you work in, right? So conservation as a vertical, or climate change as a vertical, or health as a vertical. So we'll come to that in just a bit. Next. Just go to the next slide, please. Yeah, so all of this has been sort of conceptual so far. We'll make it a little real. We've been doing a bunch of research, both expert kind of research and also ethnographic research. So I'm going to invite now Amya from our team. She's a research associate looking at our food systems and climate work. Just to quickly go through the kind of stuff that exists in food systems, then we'll do something similar in health systems, and then we'll sort of go into breakouts.
Hi, yeah, thanks, Niyat. So a quick apologies for having to keep my video off. My internet sort of acting up a bit. So we'll take a quick look at food systems and intersectionality to just understand some of the ways in which an intersectional lens can be applied at an ecosystem level. Food systems, like Nirat was saying, it is a vertical that we focus on at Belongg, but it's also a great way to sort of understand how different marginalized identities experience development challenges at a larger scale. Just given how vast the labor economy in food production and consumption is in India, questions of accessibility and equity become all the more pronounced. And of course, understanding the needs and the role of marginalized communities in food also goes hand in hand with climate and sustainability, given the role of communities in climate adaptation discourse, as well as the disproportionate sort of impact of climate change on them. So this slide is just a few sort of statistics on how different identities experience food systems, drawn primarily from secondary research conducted by Belongg for a client brief. So so if you look at on the food consumption side, and if you take an identity such as caste, according to NFHS data, 25% of scheduled caste families consume milk or don't consume meat. If you look at, say, tribal or indigeneity as an identity, tribal families are one of the most food insecure groups, low protein and calorie intake, 25 to 53% below the recommended dietary allowance. Sorry, am I audible?
Yeah, you are. There's a little bit of a lag, Amia, but I think we're able to hear you. So go ahead.
Right. Okay. I'll continue then. Yeah. And yeah, just if you also take a look at the production side of the ecosystem, while we're all aware that female agricultural laborers form the backbone of Indian agriculture, they do struggle with access to inputs, land, and also with unpaid care work. So this is just a glimpse of some statistics and figures that stand out in food systems. I'm sure these numbers are not new insights for most of us here. But just to better understand some of the ground realities of some of these identities, we have two examples of primary research that we've conducted at Belongg. The first, which is represented on this slide, is a scoping study which covers the challenges faced by persons with disabilities across the food consumption cycle. So, right from shopping at a grocery store to cooking and eating, and also eating in public, so in restaurants or even in transit. And while given that this was a scoping study, while our sample size was small, the sample was also intersectional, given that we had participants across different ethnicities, genders, and different income groups, and also representing different kinds of disabilities. The study uncovered important insights on disability and food, some of them represented here, from structural challenges such as kitchen door width and countertop height for wheelchair users, to issues with Zomato and Swiggy deliveries for persons with hearing and speech impairments. The study also uncovered certain intersectional aspects, such as, say, the affordability of a caretaker, where we had participants who could afford a full time 24/7 caretaker versus participants who were living alone in a PG paying guest accommodation without even basic facilities like a kitchen. And another intersectional aspect is just how the gendered nature of cooking and kitchen work in India sort of manifests also within the disabled communities, with very different sort of experiences and challenges faced by male and female participants with the same disability. So just quickly switching to the production side, this is a slide that represents the Belongg Agricultural Research Network pilot study that we ran sometime last year. And this is a great example of a study on intersectionality within food, but also the methodology itself was an attempt at intersectionality, where we had a network of grassroots researchers, many of them from the communities themselves. And these are just some sort of key insights from the case studies that they conducted with marginalized farming and pastoralist communities, and how they experience agricultural markets, how they access inputs, how they sort of navigate government services and schemes such as PDS, and also how they sort of perceive of climate change and feel its impact. Interesting insights came up linked to these different identities. For example, the demand for indigenous staples such as jowar to be included in the PDS system, and also the challenges in accessing commons for nomadic pastoralists, and also skepticism about government programs as meant for more quote unquote affluent farmers and not marginalized groups such as their own. So through this kind of primary and secondary research efforts, we're trying to understand how intersectionality can be thought of and applied in different development programs and services across sectors such as food, justice, health, and
I think we lost Amir, but that's actually a perfect rhyme.
mental health.
Okay, so Anugrah, do you want to sort of take it over from here? We were anyway going to have Anugrah talk about health, so
yeah. What is Samya? Yeah. Yeah, thanks, Samya. So the statistics on this slide were also drawn from secondary research that Belongg carried out for a client brief. So similar to the food systems research that Samya was referring to. So numbers we see here obviously reveal that an individual's social identities are undoubtedly related to their health status. In addition to this, people's identities are also linked to many other health factors, which are shown in the diagram. So not just their health status, but also how they seek health, etc. For example, if you were to think about an indigenous group, we find that obviously they're at high risk because there's high chance of malnutrition among these communities, but there's also poor help-seeking behavior in these communities because they lack trust in health systems. And also they struggle to maintain recovery once they have access to care. So clearly identity influences your health in all parts of the cycle. It's also important for us to note here that adopting an intersectional approach and not just looking at identities as like separate social categories is important, because if you look at this graph, for example, we can see which shows how gender and religion and caste intersect. We can see that if we see that like the difference between the two gender groups are more pronounced for men. The limited effect that class has on life expectancy of women who are not rich. So for example, among men, we see that increasing social class seems to have an impact on their life expectancy, but the same is not true for women. And again, we can also see that Adivasi women's life expectancy increases with class more than Adivasi men's. These are all very nuanced findings that you can only really find if you look at identities as intersectional rather than as individual social categories. So this is just an example of how intersectionality has come up in our secondary research work in health. Now I'll walk you through some primary research that we did as part of the mental health study that we conducted last year. So this was a mixed method study, which included 111 participants. We asked them to report on their experiences of discrimination, their mental health status, and their experiences with using mental health services, mostly therapy. And in the study, we applied intersectionality by asking participants about the nature and frequency of their discrimination. We didn't ask them to fill out a questionnaire about their identities and which categories they belong to. Instead, we asked them how often they face discrimination and how much it impacted them. So we took this as a sort of indicator of the number of marginalized identities that they had and how they overlapped, and how much discrimination they've been saved from because of their larger, more majority identities. So from this study, so the online survey that we circulated showed us that the experiences of persons with varying levels of privilege and not just the experiences of those who've been discriminated. So by doing this, we were able to see the disparities in mental health status instead of just focusing on the mental health of persons who are marginalized. So doing this sort of helped us to avoid what critics call the content specialization problem, which is sort of an overemphasis on marginalized groups and failing to study how privilege helps people and therefore coming up with solutions like that. Through this, we were also able to firmly establish that there were disparities and that even among service use and the efficacy of the service. We were able to draw comparisons between people who are more marginalized and those who were less frequently marginalized. And we found that those who were more marginalized were not only less likely to find a relevant therapist, but when they did find a good therapist, they were also less satisfied with the service. And in the qualitative phase of the same study, we recruited persons from the quantitative sample who had intersecting marginalized identities. And in the interview, we found that they all believed that the identities were relevant to their mental health. They all preferred practitioners who had the same identities as them. Some even believed that practitioners who did not belong to the same community as them could not help them, even if they had the training. And they found that when they were in therapy, many of them faced discrimination even from the practitioner on the grounds of their caste, sexuality, etc. And they found that when they were able to discuss their identities and their experiences of discrimination in therapy, they were able to benefit more from therapy and they rated the events more positively. And compared to the group that was less marginalized, the group that was more discriminated against terminated therapy more prematurely for practitioner-related reasons, while someone who was less marginalized terminated therapy because they believed that they already got all they could from it and they felt better. Someone who had been more marginalized terminated therapy for practitioner-related reasons, like they lacked training and sensitivity, and they were also less likely to return to therapy. They stopped considering therapy as an option after that point. So these were just some of the findings. You can find the entire report on the Belongg website if you want to read it. And yeah, so we find that we believe that the study made it clear that there's a need for intersectionality-informed interventions in mental health. So that's it for me. I'll pass it on to Vaibhav now to walk us through the activity.
Thanks, Anugrah. Thank you for talking about, I think, the kind of work that we've done at Belongg. And I think what we'll ask all of you to do is, that we're going to stop speaking now. I think we've done that for about half an hour nonstop. So I think we'll do an activity with all of you, and we'll tell you what you have to do. Basically, we're going to split you into groups, and we're going to give you a challenge. Right? The challenge is basically something that all of you do on a regular basis. Some of you more regularly than the others. Is that you have to design a proposal. Right? And the proposal needs to have different components, whether it's research or intervention. And as all of you know, the proposal needs to have 2 or 3 things that we're going to ask about, not the budgets, not the timelines, but rather only to think about, say, what are the processes that you're going to follow to uncover specific problems and challenges, and what kind of interventions will we see leading to certain outcomes. So I just wanted to explain the activity before we get into the scenario. And I'll just quickly read out the scenario for all of you and explain what we mean by that. So what it says is there is a lot of government and funder interest in climate adaptation for certain communities living in and around a large forest ecosystem. You are the head of an NGO tasked with proposing a program that will help with this adaptation. You are aware that these forest settlements consist of diverse groups, including Adivasis, a Muslim fishing community, and youths migrating to cities for work. Design a proposal with some research and intervention components. Just a couple of clarifications. One, when we talk about climate adaptation, I think we want you to think of it and interpret it in the ways that you work on it, because we understand climate adaptation can be quite broad, whether it's in terms of natural disasters, it's in terms of livelihoods, it's in terms of conservation, whatever you see and would like to interpret it as, you're free to do so. But once you have done that, I think what we want you to do is to think about the proposal and do two things for us, right? We'd want you to answer two questions. The first one is, what will you do to scope the problems and challenges faced by the different groups? And the second one is the three outcomes that you want to work towards, the three larger goals and objectives, and what are the top three interventions that you would propose as part of the proposal? Whether it is to scope the problems and challenges, whether it is the kind of solutions you want to work towards, that would be up to you. So what we'll do is we'll just split you into 4 groups and assign you breakout rooms. And then one of us from the Belongg team will also be there to help you navigate this in case there are any questions or clarifications. But just before that, are there any questions on this? If anyone requires any clarification before we go into the breakout groups? Okay. So, Amya, would it be possible? Can we assign everyone to breakout rooms now?
Sure. So Anugrah will just be assigning folks, and I'll just quickly switch to a better connection and join back.
Thank you, everyone. I think all of us are back to the main room by default, and we won't waste much time. I think what we'll do is from each of the groups, from group 1 to 4, we're going to call upon one person from each group to just present what are the ways they thought about what are the interventions and outcomes, and maybe quickly, if you can summarize for the other participants in the room to clarify what is it that you all thought about. So we'll just go in order. Maybe we'll ask someone from group 1 to volunteer, and then maybe share what they came up with.
Sure. So Aarti, Ananya, do any of you want to share? And I can share my screen as well, just to show everyone the presentation.
Aarti or Anya, if you're speaking, you're on mute.
Arti, would you like to go ahead? I think we'll add wherever.
I was going to propose your name.
We'll add. I mean, if you could just like maybe start by how you start with the assumptions, we will just add to whatever you have to say.
Sorry, are you going ahead? I'll add, no? Okay, I'll do it. We had a wonderful group with a whole lot of time to talk about a proposal whose extent we actually didn't know anything about. So we're just presuming this is a one-year proposal of some sort or a one-year time frame. We started with assumptions, basically, that everyone agreed that climate change impacts ecosystems, but that people are differently dependent and impacted. And that there are some stressors that we can't attribute to climate, but ecosystems are nonetheless vulnerable. And people, therefore. And so hey, do you want to take this over, Ananya? Jump in. We'll distribute the climate impacts on our team.
So, one second. At the moment when we're talking about scoping, one of the few things that we kind of figured is that every, like Aarti said, every particular community is going to have its own set of issues and its own set of needs and you know, because multiple communities are kind of staying together, we have to also understand how these communities impact each other, like through say, for example, I mean, one of the things that we spoke about is perhaps if a Muslim fisherman, fisher people community were fishing at the common water resource, and that leads to a particular kind of imbalance in the ecosystem, it would directly impact everyone living in that area, like the Adivasis. So that was one of
and so I think while we were also looking at understanding the different groups that exist in this space and understanding their needs, and also comparing the conflicts between their needs and how they're impacting each other, I think another space we wanted to focus research on was to understand the issues that are arising because of these climate disturbances, like actually speaking with experts. I have a massive lack of words because I don't know this field, but essentially speaking to the experts to understand the environmental issues that are happening, that are occurring in this forest, and also looking at that aspect of things, along with also understanding the community needs. I think, Raj, if you would like to add something.
Hi, sorry to cut you off, and I don't want to do this, but I think we just have a minute each for about each group. So if we can do that quickly and then maybe move to the next part of the session, because I think we're just short on time. So maybe if I could ask Tushar or Jacob from group 2 to come up, and we'll just do this quickly. We'll obviously share all the information and the insights that you've captured with everybody too.
Jacob, I can just take this quickly and then please chime in whenever.
No, please, you're much better at this than me.
No.
Okay.
So I think just building off of what Group 1 said quite quickly is that we are cognizant that there are 3 distinct diverse groups in this. I think the main thing that we took out over here, one of our colleagues, Anu, had mentioned, is to go about scoping the problem challenges. The main thing is to hear from the communities themselves, that their voices come up front, understand what the challenges they're facing. We could, basis using that hat, we kind of assume these challenges in the leftmost row. Here, this understanding is a legal access challenge, like understanding legalities, challenges to livelihoods across communities, access to resources, etc., through that bit. So those, I think, just being cognizant about that they are distinct communities which have their own different challenges and problems, which as 3 diverse groups in one geography with scarce resources will have their own intersecting issues, right, through and through. So I think something to be very mindful of when scoping these problems. I think best heard through the community, just summed up, and through the interventions. 3 things that our group came up with were, I think, setting up a much like a diversive local governance body. I think understanding, I think ensuring there's fair representation across the field of all 3, ensuring there's a youth community for the migrants, ensuring the Muslims are well represented as well as the Adivasis in those counts, in those counts. The second most thing is in terms of intervention would be something that's culturally, like cultural involvement, like say folk plays, or even we had suggested Bollywood movies that have a large footprint that would kind of traverse all cultures, help that bring the community together, and then through that involve awareness programs in between that and through. Also capacity building programs that are led by the local leaders of these communities themselves. And say, for example, with the Muslim communities, the imams could be a trusted source where they could provide knowledge and information across the board. I think the goal of this, the outcomes, to quickly sum it up, is to bring the community together, help them understand each other's diversities, each needs, how they all have a role to play, and utilize the resources that they're dealing with within the to adapt to the climate that they're in, and then B, given that the adaptation is required, once they know the challenges, how can they equitably distribute these resources across? I think that would end it for me.
Thank you, Tushar. And quickly, I think I'll request Divya from Group 3 to maybe speak about what you all came up with in your group.
I don't know if we should screen share because we have too many slides. Anyway, so we discussed first identifying common challenges that all 3 groups would be facing, and then trying to maybe try to get the community to express how they would want to address them, and then move on to capacity building to address these challenges. And we also discussed having baseline surveys to understand what subgroups within each of these communities would be going through according to the roles that are assigned to them, livelihoods, and educational opportunities. And
Yeah, if anybody wants to add, please do. Athira, maybe?
Yeah, I think according to what we discussed, two of the outcomes that we were thinking of would be one, capacity building, which would address the needs that would come out of the FGDs and the conversation that we would have with subgroups. And the second one would be to build advocacy and leadership amongst the community only, so that they can, advocate for their own needs, etc. This was two of the like broader points that we could, I think, can sum up from the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And sorry to be rushing you, but Chico, could you maybe just take everyone through group 4 and summarize the points you all came up with?
Sure. I'll just share my screen once. So breakup room 4 again had 6 people: Kirti, Vandana, Dylan, Sanjana, Ananya, and me. So we discussed around the problems that we had, the scope of the problem, where we discussed around participatory research, around the diversity community, where with the groups focused on realities, partnering with on-ground stakeholders, institutions, and NGOs, understanding the strengths and getting the problems with the support of the youth involvement, as well as workshops around this, so that we can get more clear picture from the marginalized community for a part of it. The 3 interventions or 3 outcomes that we were wondering around were, again, identifying the right institutions to conduct institutional research. This will help us to do more of on-ground activities with more data. Also, our team came up with generating ecological scientific data. That was the intervention, and the outcome is to get more stakeholders out of it. The third was the intervention where we thought about the mangrove forest, and also thinking about the coastal ecosystem in relationship to the agricultural practices that is being again practiced at these venues. The outcome is to save the agricultural land and also maintain the sea levels. We talked around, again, linking of adaptation and interventions with the employment and livelihood generation, and how to shift it from the large scale plantation programs with employment generation programs of government or philanthropy. Also, Dylan and Priyansha added about bringing in interventions on ground, and also getting a survey kind of a model where we can get learnings from the tribal community and include them for different kind of again the discussions that we have, and ensuring the community members lead to the project to promote ownership. The outcome again over here will be creating a cohort of leaders from the marginalized sections itself. So basically creating leaders out of them and equipping them with the knowledge, and so that they can themselves take these things forward and protect the forest in the longer run. So yeah, feel free to add anything if I've missed out, my team. Yeah.
Great. I think thanks for summing that up. Super interesting to hear everyone's perspective. So obviously 30 minutes is too small a time frame to actually design a program, but hopefully enough to grapple with the very important pieces one should be thinking about when one is designing for such communities. We're going to wrap up very quickly with some very tangible kind of next steps, and also hopefully some collaboration that might emerge from this. So we're working with a range of, we're trying to work with organizations to try and embed such thinking in their ways of operating. And there are 4 pathways. The first is really building knowledge and capacity within the organizations around intersectionalities. So there's a bunch of readings, training materials, etc., which exist out there. Some of them are also with Belongg. If you want any of that, just let us know. They're all kind of freely available. Number 2, so there are program design is a very important kind of lever, and we think that there's a need to really create a lot of intersectional programs, and there's a lot of work, collaborations going. So if you're interested, again, that's one opportunity to think through. Again, how do you think about program delivery, the kind of metrics you develop, checklists to develop. That becomes a third kind of lever you can exercise. And then finally, at the ecosystem level, how do we elevate this concern, make this more visible, have more discussions, more conferences, more events, where these kinds of pieces get subconsciously kind of assimilated and put into practice. Now, coming to the very concrete things that we're doing, and also I'll send a quick link to a Google form in case any of you are interested in carrying out joint research. Next, please. So there's three pieces that we've been doing in the last year or so. So one, we did a fairly big unconference called the Intersectional SDG Unconference, which was done along with Dalberg and JPAL, which brought together some global kind of thinkers and doers on these topics. We're also now in discussions with JPAL to launch a large program on intersectional research across different topics, pairing up professors in the JPAL network with academics from marginalized backgrounds, so to create more kind of organic problem statements. So if there's any interest in participating in that, that's still pretty much at the discussion stage right now. It's a proposal stage. So just let us know, and we'd love to incorporate your perspectives and then maybe bring you on board as a partner. Number two, there's a platform that's still in pilot stage. It's a platform called Belongg Circle. You can go to belongcircle.com. And the idea is, how do you sort of matchmake experts who have the lived experience of some of these identities in some of these domains, and make sure that their insights inform program design. And let's say if you're designing a program, or if philanthropy is funding a program, how do you make sure that those voices are there in the planning discussions? And finally, Amia alluded to this, we're also trying to create a loose network of researchers across the country, which come from these identities. So if you have somebody in your organization, or if you know somebody who might want to be part of this network, please let us know, and we'll sort of we'd love to take that separately. Next. One very tangible thing we are really hoping to do with the RNP network, with all of your organizations, is to actually conceive of interesting intersectional research projects. There could be very small research projects which are purely ethnographic. Let's say you're working on a certain topic and you want to understand how does that topic vary for some marginalized communities in the geography that you work in. We'd love to explore research projects with you, mixed methods, right? So if you just open, I'm going to paste this form. Hopefully you'll be able to click this, see if this opens for you. And we'll also send an email with this form. So if this form will basically let you just enter details of the kind of research projects you might be interested in. And then our team will get in touch and we can sort of have separate conversations. Okay, just hold on. So let me just change permissions. Hold on. It's strange because here it's showing that the permissions are there, but in any case, we'll send you a link on email, and then you can just fill it up in case you're interested in collaborating on research projects in your topic and your geography. So yeah, I think we're almost at time. Anything anyone would like to share? We can, otherwise I'd love to turn it back to Sahana.
Since you've given your contacts, I suppose they know how to reach out to you. Thank you very much, Neerath and team, for creating an engaging session, and for within the short span of time, you did get our great sense thinking in terms of how do we use these concepts. So thank you very much. I don't have anything else to add. Do reach out to the team in case you're interested in having these continuing these conversations, and we'll share a recording, which in case you want to share it with your teams, you could do that as well. Thanks again to all of you, and thanks for your time this afternoon. Take care. Bye.
Thanks, Anna. Thanks very much. And thanks everyone for being here.
Thank you.